The colonizer cannot decolonize you.
Yeah.
So it is the colonized who needs to embrace the responsibility to decolonize themselves. In the African context, you are speaking to just a section of the population, the privileged one, those that have imbibed the colonizer's medicine, the colonizer's education. You are asking them to now vomit the poison and take the whole lot of them into a decolonized space. Academics on the African continent tend to be the new colonizers. Yeah, they tend themselves to be, they kick out the original colonizer and then assume that space to really decolonize. The colonial system must consider you an enemy. If you are still acceptable in that realm, that means you are not ready to decolonize. For me, it has ended on the personnel aspect. But then we want to be very deliberate and start Africanization of the content of what we teach. Academia has this penchant for fashion. So it's fashionable to talk about decoloniality, meanwhile you're doing nothing about it.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode on the Nubiarometry podcast, episode 008. This is a podcast that dabbles into geopolitics, geoeconomics, and development issues on the African continent, and is slowly becoming a home to intellectual conversations on the East Coast and Horn of Africa, and I dare say on the African continent, because today we have a guest from South Africa. I believe from the province of Limpopo, known as Professor Geoff Mapaya. He is a professor at the University of Venda in Limpopo, South Africa. And he specializes in African studies, musicology, because he's a fully fledged musician. He also specializes in indigenous knowledge systems and many other areas. So shortly before we go into the conversation, I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that we'll be covering, a range of topics in today's episode, and then we will now start the podcast full steam ahead. So today we'll be touching a number of topics, and some of these topics are, for instance, challenges and the main issues affecting academia on the African continent. I think academia is faced with a lot of challenges and many issues underlying, but some which are covert, but some which are also overt. We'll talk about stuff like editorial gatekeeping and academic publishing on the African continent. So we are talking about journals, we are talking about citation indexes and stuff like that. We'll also talk about various trends in academia on the African continent, Afrocentrism. We'll look at issues like parachute science, decolonization of curricula on the African continent, and many other topics. So if you don't want to miss a really exciting 1 hour of discussions, an intellectual discussion with a professor from South Africa, make sure you tune into the podcast for the next 1 hour. And I think with that, I'm through the intro. Professor Geoff Mapaya, good evening.
Hey, good evening, my brother, and how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I can't complain. Africa is rising. Why should we complain?
That's a really nice way to kick it off. I don't know, in the introduction, did I capture everything the way you would want to put it?
Yeah, that is more or less what I am about. You've covered my areas quite adequately. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I'm also probably not messing up with the geography of South Africa when I say University of Venda is based in Limpopo as a province.
Spot on. You did your research.
Let's transition into the conversation, Professor.
Thank you.
Academia in Africa today. Like, what is your general take of academia on the African continent? Issues affecting academia, challenges, opportunities, and even trends that you are noticing, because I think you have been academic for 30, 40 years or something of the sort. What are some of the trends, issues, challenges, opportunities that you are noticing being an established academic yourself?
Okay, I think I would like to start by mapping out the scholarship on the continent.
Yes.
Africa has got 5 regions: the North, Central, West, East, and South. I may not be well versed with the Francophone side of research on the continent because of obvious issues, language barriers. And obviously, the focus of African scholars would mainly be on the sub-Saharan part of Africa. So where we stand today, you have academic scholarship obtaining in the western part of Africa, and then you have another type of academic scholarship going on in eastern part of Africa, and obviously the southern part of Africa. Now, the West and the South would have a slightly similar kind of issues because of the historic developments in the 2 regions. Yeah. South Africa has got one very notorious complexion to it. Mm-hmm. That colonialism has not left the part of the continent. Yeah. So with Kenya, for instance, when you talk about colonialism, it's more of an intellectual presence. Yeah. Rather than physical. In South Africa, you see colonialism in the white supremacist structures that we've had to deal with. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I think in West, it's like Kenya. If there is remnants of colonialism, I'm afraid you have yourself to blame. But when it comes to the southern tip, we still have to contend with gatekeepers and people who really are representing the last version of Eurocentric occupation on the continent. Mm-hmm. It sounds harsh, but it is a reality. Yeah. Right. And obviously, my investment in this discourse of academic freedom is informed by the realities of my context, which is South Africa. Mm-hmm. So if I rely on South African experience, you'll excuse me. But because of the centrality of South Africa in the discourse, academic discourse on the continent, some of the things I'll be saying or will be saying may apply in the 2 or 3 regions that are not necessarily my focus. Mm. That would be the context that I paint to you, Pius.
Okay.
Right.
And so as we are just starting the discussion, when we talk about curriculum transformation on the continent, let's say if we look at higher education, but also even basic primary education on the continent, in your estimation, do you think, maybe save the case of South Africa, which might be a special case, but of course, which informs a lot of your own reality, but even if you were to merge the South African experience with experience across the continent, do you think we have made meaningful strides in terms of, let's say, integrating African epistemologies, integrating indigenous knowledge systems, and trying to move away from the Eurocentric curricula that has been quite prevalent on the African continent? Do you think we are making meaningful strides?
But I think before we even enter into that discussion, because now we are evaluating how are we faring. I would want us to step back a little bit and interrogate the concept decolonization and colonization. Yeah. You might be privy to a development where the concept is now being questioned. It is flaunted too often. Exactly. That it loses the gravitas, the power it once had. Yeah. So, in very simple terms, Colonialism is when another man leaves their house, comes into yours, batter you, and then instruct you to live and abide by his rules.
Yeah.
How you handle your children has to be okayed by a system that this person would have imposed on you. That is colonialism.
Yeah.
Now, there are two actors in the process. Is the colonizer and the colonized.
Yeah.
Right. Remember, the colonized did not invite the colonizer into his life. Now, when we talk about decolonization, it becomes a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
Because now, who are you talking to? Which agent are we focusing on? Are we focusing on the one who colonized, or are we focusing on the one who has been colonized? Who are we instructing to untangle us out of this quagmire?
Yeah.
That's the question. And then if we don't answer that question, we are not going to win. The colonizer cannot decolonize you.
Yeah.
So it is the colonized who needs to embrace the responsibility to decolonize themselves. Now, having said that,
in fact, maybe just to shortly jump in, there's this famous quote by Stephen Bantu Biko.
Yes.
That the most precious tool in the arsenal of the oppressor is the mind of the
colonized.
Exactly.
Yes. So that is a very brilliant interjection, because that's where I'm going.
Okay.
Right. When we say we want to decolonize, in the African context, we are speaking to just a section of the population, the privileged one, those that have imbibed the colonizer's medicine, the colonizer's education. You are asking them to now vomit the poison and take the whole lot of them into a decolonized space. That presents another challenge, whether they have genuinely accepted that imposition by one sector to another is wrong. My argument and my assessment is that we might be missing a point there, because academics on the African continent tend to be the new colonizers. Yeah, they tend themselves to be, they kick out the original colonizer and then assume that space.
Only to replace.
Yeah, only to replace that, but keep colonizing the masses. Right?
Yeah.
But then the reality is the masses are so powerless that they cannot even fathom the call to decolonize themselves. So we have to really get into grips with this concept if we are going to make any progress. Now, coming to your question, whether we have made progress or not, I've been to Kenya. I've marveled at the level of education, but let's call it what it is, the level of colonial education that prevails there. It has somehow taken root, so much so that we can even call it the Kenyan education system. Yeah, but when you really look at characteristics, you can see that this is colonial education. But it is efficient nonetheless for the present time economies. You compare it with South Africa. South Africa is slightly behind, because when you are off the mark with the process of decolonizing, we were still having to contend with apartheid, which another layer of modern day colonialism. So people my age, for instance, have gone through what we call Bantu education, quite inferior education, and the kind of education that really prepares you to take instructions and nothing more. Yeah. So similarly, when you go to West Africa, you have a slightly different complexion of education, African education. Yeah. But my contention is that it is still very colonial because the ordinary village African cannot fit.
Yes.
And then if we have a system that is so disjointed with what prevails in the most rural areas of our society, that education for me is useless. So look at it this way. We have an African scholar in the middle who's called to decolonize. You have the colonizer on the other end. You have African indigenous knowledge system on the other hand.
Yeah.
Actually, I even don't want to call them knowledge systems. Let's say African existence. Let's call it that for lack of a better word. So this scholar in between is called to turn around. When you turn around, it means you're turning your back towards the colonizer.
Yeah.
And then now you're facing your African reality.
Yeah.
That is what it means in pictorial terms. Now, what does that mean for me as an academic? It means I must cleanse myself of all things that I've learned from this other system and learn anew things I've neglected that has proven to be useful for my people for generations. But then, obviously, there've been a year of neglect, so many years of neglect. We might have to repackage that into some kind of a system that we can then transplant or maybe be able to move it into areas where it is needed, like schools and churches and so forth. So far, the African scholar is talking about turning his back. He's refusing to turn the back totally and learn anew. We still want to hold on to the little credibility that was bestowed upon us by the colonizing system, and hope we can jet into the lived experiences of Africans with that kind of a baggage.
Yeah.
I'm saying that is unworkable. Yes. I'm proposing that for you to really decolonize, the colonial system must consider you an enemy. If you are still acceptable in that realm, that means you are not ready to decolonize.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you think it comes down to a binary system?
Yes.
Like you are either in this particular side or on the other side?
Yeah, I guess for now, that's what it means. Because then when you finally articulate with perhaps Western systems, which by that time would have graduated from being colonial into being maybe innocently Eurocentric, then we can then articulate, and obviously we don't have a choice because of the digital platform that is now available.
Yeah.
So, but then you interact with it in your terms as an African, not as an African who's a European wanting to appease neglected Africans, you know? Yeah. You'll be creating the bridges from an African point of view. This is actually what is happening even in politics today. This is what Ibrahim Traore is trying to do. Say, hey, let me shut down the country. Let me wake up and see if I can survive on myself. I think at some point he's going to create relations with the outside world. But then those relations will be different. There wouldn't be relations of a subservient country to some deep boss Western superpower somewhere. France, if the next president is sober enough, would approach Ibrahim Traore as an equal, and in whatever treaty they draft, he will have to listen to what Traore wants and put what he wants in. So that kind of interaction or cross-pollination on an equal basis is what the world needs. But for us to reach that level, we still have to retreat, pull ourselves out of this entrapment, try to redefine ourselves. What is it we want? And re-engage in our own terms.
Okay.
Right.
So actually, the previous episode to this one, episode 007, I had a Kenyan academic, Oduro Bura, and
Yes,
talked
I watched
a couple of these matters. And I think the main one I mentioned in the case of Kenya, for instance, and many other African countries, of course, South Africa will once again be outside this box, was the Africanization programs in the, let's say, post-independence period.
Yes.
Now, of course, even the word independence, throw it now, right now, some people will call it third independence. But coming to the Africanization program, so for instance, his view was decolonization is a process. Like it's a journey, not a destination per se. And for him, of course, he agreed that there are a lot of things in academia, even in Africa, education systems in Africa today, that are not decolonized. But he believes that some progress, maybe through Africanization, has been achieved. And the reason I'm saying maybe South Africa is still outside the box, there's this great show on South African TV, The Big Debate.
Yes.
I've been watching a couple of episodes here and there, or over, like, let's say, the past year. And there's this one where I think it was the issue of higher education. I think it was the University of Cape Town, Stellenbosch, etc. And they were talking about the number of blacks in, let's say, faculty management positions. Because if you just focus on the students, we are admitting all manner of students. Like our campus is majority black. But when people start interrogating, how about the faculty and management? But if you take the case of Kenya, or maybe other East African countries, or even West African, you find that Africanization since the 80s, 70s, 80s, up till today, is basically a reality. That you have most of the 99% of the faculty are Africans. Even if you have Asians, they're Africans of Asian extraction. And even if you have some whites, you'll find that maybe they are whites who are second, third generation on the African continent. Yes. So do you think in that particular context, will you say that maybe outside of South Africa, in many of the other areas, maybe the Africanization programs are an indicator that some meaningful strides have been made?
Yeah, surely. That's precisely why it was necessary for me to paint the context in the beginning.
Yeah.
That was in recognition of the fact that these two regions, for instance, have managed to truly Africanize. But then the Africanization, for me, has ended on the personnel aspect.
Yeah.
But then we want to be very deliberate and start Africanization of the content of what we teach. I'm not sure if I were to throw this question back to you, how much of the content that we teach in East African universities and West African universities is Africanized?
Very little.
Very little. So I think we can safely say at least we've achieved something by making sure that we put people of the right kind of, how do I put it? The African people have proliferated this space. Mm-hmm. But then if you see that the content is still by and large Eurocentric, it speaks to what I alluded to earlier, to say African scholars are in the middle. They are still undecided whether they want to turn their back 180 degrees and disregard that which they imbibed and start anew by drawing from the African reality and fit the curricula. That is something that needs to happen. And I think it will happen if things like this happen, where there are podcasts that are questioning things. Now, academics are sharing this idea. And then here you are, you're giving us the platform to, to, to articulate our apprehensions, and also maybe you are allowing us to dream, and make sure that we put our dreams in the public, and then through that constellation of ideas, we'll arrive at a place where we agree that yes, philosophy, it's not complete if 90% comes from Europe. So let's have 90% coming from Kenya, maybe 10% from Europe. Once you've defined it that way, then the onus is on us to carry out research and try to come up with material to fill the 90%. That is where we need to go, and we need to go there fast. And the good thing is that the white supremacists are retreating from the continent. That gives us space to then occupy the space and make sure that we put on the table very credible African sensed kind of education.
Okay. And so, Professor, when you find a scholar from South Africa or an academic who is, I think, also a clinical psychologist, Wahbie Long, you had already made allusions to the attack, let's say, on a term such as decolonization or the concept itself. When somebody such as Wahbie Long says there's something really wrong with academia on the African continent, and he narrows down to say a word such as decolonization, decolonizing, has been thrown so much around, it's strongly linked to identity politics, to the extent that it has become an empty phrase.
Yes.
I mean, what would be your rejoinder to such remarks?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with him. Mm-hmm. Academia is this penchant for fashion. So it's fashionable to talk about decoloniality, meanwhile you're doing nothing about it. So the more you do that, the more people realize that you're just bluffing. There's no substance in what you're saying. Yeah, I totally agree with him.
Yeah. And earlier on, when you were saying you are painting a broader picture of how we can understand the, let's say, decolonization conversation, what will be a take on, in a much broader way, let's say, the debate about critical race theory? Because you find that in the US, you have this huge right-wing movement, your Ben Shapiro's, your Candace Owens, and what have you, who, let's say, starting from around COVID, they really pushed back on critical race theory. And they were, of course, defining it in the way they think it actually is. And when you started, you were giving this binary of the oppressor versus the oppressed, which we can also trace back, let's say, to, among many other scholars, Frantz Fanon, in the 50s. Like, when you see such kind of pushback on these, let's say, the oppressor versus oppressed kind of binary, like, let's say, someone being subjugated and the other one who is doing the subjugation. I mean, do you think, like, the backlash means that the conversation itself has actually touched a nerve? And then we are having something like maybe in the 60s when Martin Luther King was pushing civil rights, there was a white backlash that came out of it.
Yes. Yeah, it's very consistent. If Black people want to assert themselves in whatever way, there is a response. I mean, music, I'll tell you a musical example. If the Black community produces someone like, say, Miles Davis, the white will present a counterbalance in the form of maybe Chet Baker or so and so. So whatever you put on the table, they will look for something that equals or even betters what you say, which is for me sad.
Yeah.
It's a serious problem in South Africa. You know our national anthem, right?
Yeah.
It is two in one.
Clearly.
Yeah. It's two in one. The fact that it is two in one highlights the hard stances the two factions held. That those that had the privilege don't want to let go, don't want to understand where the others are coming from. They are not prepared to meet you halfway. They will rather go to Trump and ask him to intervene. That is very, very sad. And then I think that is what is going to make this process of decolonization very difficult. Yeah, can we imagine if they were genuinely going to say, hey, we are sorry this happened, we would like to be part of the solution. What are you talking about? Decolonize the curriculum. Yes, I've got my own ideas. What about we do this and that, and then we bring up, we do it together. Yeah, then it would have short-circuited this agony, this process of having to battle it out with little tools at our disposal, because they have institutions, they have got systems, they know how they design those systems. We were supposed to come together and deal with these issues of decolonization. So to answer your question, it is unfortunate that there are proponents of a critical race theory. I was once disarmed by a scholar who said I'm just a useless essentialist.
Oh.
So because I was saying, that's fine, you are sorted, let me sort myself out, let me sort my people out, then we can have a conversation. Yeah. And nowadays, Pius, I'm deliberate to clear my hard drive of things that I've learned from school, theories that I've learned. I'm saying, if I need a theory, let me go to the village and see if I can find one.
Yeah.
And often I do come across theories that would support my argument. But the problem then comes into your next subject, academic publishing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, that's what I wanted to jump into nicely. Now we talk about academic publishing.
Yes.
And there's this concrete example that I was reading about, and it was actually quite interesting because I remember me myself when I finished my master's in Osnabrück in northwestern Germany. We received emails. I don't know how they even got our email addresses, but apparently I think when you had already registered that you are doing your thesis and you are graduating, like, because that information is publicly available at the university, so there were these journals, I think they're in Bulgaria or Kazakhstan.
Yes.
And they were just sending emails to all of us. And when I was asking my fellow African scholars, even from Latin America, Asia, and yeah, I received the email, and I think they were giving you 10 euros or something.
Yes.
And two of my friends are actually finishing their PhD in Hong Kong at the moment. And I was talking to one of them from Ghana. He's called Timothy. Just, I think, about a month ago. And he was juxtaposing one of my other friends from Ethiopia. And there's this idea where, like, you find journals from Thailand, from all over, even from Africa. And it's slightly easier for, let's say, scholars from the Global South to publish in them than to publish in the northern journals, where there is a lot of editorial gatekeeping.
Yes.
And so the journal article I was reading about, talking about fake journals, predatory journals, and the webinar that Elsevier held during COVID, I think it was in June of 2020.
Yes.
And they were saying, how to identify predatory journals, etc., peer review and everything. But in the journal, it quotes one Nigerian scholar who said, who can even say you are predatory and you are not? Because apparently two journals from Nigeria were labeled predatory or fake.
Yes.
And the guy was like,
was
like, if I try to publish in a northern journal, some of them are demanding $5,000. So who is really predatory?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, what's your take on the entire publishing in academia, especially when it comes to the global north, global south divide?
Yeah, there's still a very, very strong gatekeeping there. As you've alluded, the so-called high-impact journals actually means Euro-American journals.
Yeah.
You have to earn the right to publish there. Quite often, it's not the merit of what you put on the table.
Yeah.
It would be what you can afford and what part of the world are you coming from. And then even in South Africa, it's even worse. If I publish the kind of ideas we are sharing today, which are not very comfortable to some people,
Yeah.
and then you send that to a journal in the UK, the editors in the UK, most of them, 90% or thereabout,
Yeah.
not having any interest or having any linkage with African continent,
Yeah.
assist with the task of assessing the manuscript. And then who do they go to in South Africa to evaluate your manuscript?
Yeah.
To someone with European origins. So it's like they're talking about you. Hey, yo, I received this article from one of the people in your continent. What do you think about him? What do you say? And then they say, that one is a troublemaker. So then you don't get published, you see. And I don't know how they deal with countries like Kenya, because if they want to really evaluate, they have no choice but to send it to a Kenyan scholar who can go either way.
Yeah.
But then you see, that way their review is a little bit, okay. If they say you didn't make it, it would be on the basis of what you presented and nothing else. Yeah. But with the South African situation, it would largely be on the basis that your ideas are not welcome.
Because it also sounds almost like a double whammy, because gatekeeping in the global north, you yourself as an African scholar, you cannot publish in the northern journals. But when you guys work hard and say, let's come up with something indigenous, local, like the two Nigerian journals, then somebody also uses their citation index, corpus, to say, no, don't go to that journal. It's a predatory journal. It's a fake journal. So you are like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either way, you get screwed.
Yeah, either way, yeah. But we need to really think about getting out of that trap.
Yeah.
And in South Africa, unfortunately, the instrument that is supposed to give us at least a break, the Department of Higher Education and Training. I'm not sure whether they are unwittingly colluding with the so-called A-list journals to really make sure that it is difficult for Africans to publish. For instance, in Kenya, we have the only journal that is supposed to take care of African musicology. It's called African Musicology Online. It's a prestigious journal that, if accepted by one of these lists, will see scholarship in African musicology skyrocketing. But it's not on the list. So therefore, we cannot publish there. And then, we are trying to get it on the list. It's not easy either, because they look at who publishes there. They don't see any articles from Europe. So they are reluctant to accept it.
Yeah, to include it,
but then it's a struggle that we are committed to. Will keep knocking until such time. That I liked the proposal that perhaps African scholars must entertain the idea of coming up with their own journal aggregator.
Citation index, something.
Yes. And I would want to be part of that if there's anyone who makes a move towards the establishment of that, because that's what we need. And only then, you see, only then the attitude will change and the North will come and meet the South halfway.
Halfway.
Yeah. You are aware of the open versus paywall journals.
Yeah.
Yeah. The open access journals have been so robust that it is no longer profitable to run a paywall journal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it forces those journals that used the paywall system to exclude, to open up and come down.
Yeah.
So I suspect if we have an alternative that would give the African voice space, I know they will come and say, let's talk, we can still work together. When you're on this list, you're automatically in our list, something like that. I think that can happen. It only needs committed scholars to start doing it, to start putting it into. Maybe we should use your platform, if you allow me, that I speak to African scholars, my brothers and sisters. Steve Biko says, black men, you're on your own. We are on our own. So we need to really take up this idea of establishing an African citation index. Let's see if we can put our heads together and get it off the ground. Yeah. Because once we do that, at least we can be able to even start working on citation systems that are informed by our African realities. Yeah. For instance, in Africa, knowledge doesn't reside in an individual. It's a communal kind of knowledge. We need to find a system where we can deal with that and manage it. So this is a challenge. I think if scholars my age can deal with it and make sure that the next scholars don't have to reinvent the wheel, something like that, would have at least achieved something towards decolonization.
Quite true.
Yeah.
Earlier in the discussion, you had made an allusion to academia becoming like a new form of colonizers.
Yes.
And when I was reading about the academic publishing theme, I came across a journal, I think, that was describing the situation in Uganda. And I also think I saw one in South Africa or Nigeria. I can't quite remember which one it was. But it was also the first time I'm learning, because my PhD dream died, so I did not go that route. But it was the first time I'm learning that for you to get a promotion in Africa, the faculty heads in African universities, management, they also bring the issue of publishing a certain number of journals in high impact northern journals.
Yes.
Like journal articles in high impact northern journals.
Yes.
Is that maybe what you were referring to as like a new form of colonialism from these academic elites? Internal gatekeeping of sorts?
Yes, it is. It is.
Because I can understand if, let's say, you're a PhD student and some of the requirements for you to graduate, you have to publish 2 articles or 4 articles, etc. in the 3-year, 4-year period. But once you say, like, for somebody to be promoted, to become a senior lecturer or something, you have to bring us the receipts from the northern journals. Like,
you see?
Plainly gatekeeping, right?
Yeah, it's gatekeeping, and it sounds innocent because it is done by us. For us. Yes. But also, how we relate to indigenous knowledge, we have this unfortunate arrogance that because I come from a university, I can manage the process of getting indigenous knowledge from a particular community. Quite often, you hear scholars talking about African music. African music, that African music instruments. But if you were to ask them who plays that instrument, they wouldn't answer you. They will show you pictures of African instruments with people playing the instruments. You ask them, Do you know the names of the people who are playing those instruments? They will say, but why are you asking? So, look, you see, you are interested in the product these people produce, but you are not interested in them. You don't want to know about their well-being, which is why they can't be remunerated. They will remain impoverished. They will remain useless because that which they could have used for their own living, you have looted essentially. And you are no worse than a company that comes and kill people or move people out of a place and mine and get the diamond and sell it to Europe for processing. You are not different. You are doing exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same.
Yeah. So African scholars must be alert to this reality that they've got a specific kind of responsibility when they deal with indigenous systems. That in doing that, they must make sure that they don't become the new colonizer. Yeah.
Do you think that maybe the entire concept of cultural imperialism, or sometimes as people in the global north might put it quite nicely, cultural relativism, because they always like, you can make it relative. Certain cultures are stronger than others. In Germany, there is even a term, Leitkultur, like the leading culture, if I can translate it.
Yeah.
So, like, do you think in the context of cultural imperialism that it goes hand in hand with the colonial experience and
Yes.
has so deeply affected people on the African continent, even in academia, that we have this very strong preference for everything foreign.
Yes.
And it goes even beyond academia. You can see the patterns replicating themselves in virtually all walks of life. You are a musician, you can talk about music,
Yes.
you can talk about sports.
Yes.
Like people, maybe South Africa might once again be on a different league slightly, but like if you look at African teams, when here in Kenya, local teams are playing soccer, football, you compare that with the amount of people in the so-called video dens who are watching the Premier League or the Bundesliga or whatever league is on, Serie A. Like, do you think that is, how can I put it? Like, it's so deeply ingrained in us, that entire experience, that even in academia, so that when you're talking about people are getting promoted, like there's a very strong preference to anything foreign.
Yes, it is ingrained in us. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
My take is that this is one battle we can choose not to engage ourselves in.
Yeah.
With the coming of AI, the leveling of the playing field, I think all cultures deserving will eventually be on the spotlight in equal terms. I was just looking at so many podcasts that are based on reacting to African innovations or African this or that.
Yeah.
So, meaning then that, the world is no longer oblivious of the existence of excellence somewhere. You would have Amapiano or Afrobeat or what informing in the music culture, even in countries where you initially wouldn't expect them to access. So I would rely on time for us to reach the equilibrium state. I don't think we need to battle it, but it's coming. You see, if you look at the complexion of development, the first three revolutions were actually Europe driven.
Yeah.
But if you look at the space where we are now, Asia is playing a major role. People of Asian descent, Indians, Chinese, and so forth, they are now claiming that space.
True.
I don't know where I base my prediction on, but I believe immediately after the Asian era, it will be the African era. And then, yes, and then I'm not sure what is it that would put on the table. But with the speed with which things are developing, I think maybe in our lifetime we'll see the emergence of an African era. Yeah, you also take the political developments now and the digital space that makes it possible for us to quickly take notes from progressive leaders. So I think it's gaining momentum. Is going to we might realize it in our lifetime.
Okay. I will say that is, for me, slightly optimistic. I think Africa always has the potential, but I think when you look at the other side of the coin, political leadership, it always lets us down a lot. And actually, the thought that came to mind, something different, like when it comes to industrialization, you mentioned Asian countries. So I think there's this Scottish historian, Neil Ferguson. I think it's him once said that when we look at how Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, China industrialized, that it was expected that Africa would have been supplying the cheap labor and attracting so many of the industries in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they used the phrase, Asia ate Africa's lunch. Like when you go to school and somebody eats your lunch. And now we can say maybe we are at dinner time. And I've been noticing the Gulf countries, they are making so many huge inroads on the African continent. And some of them, they're just acting as middlemen, like the UAE. Technology comes from, let's say, the global north. Germany comes from the UK, US. The Gulf countries, they quickly take the technology, bring in some of the experts. And then they are the ones now making inroads on the African continent because, let's say, the Americans, the North Americans, and the Europeans are still maybe not very sure. So you find that they're taking that particular link. And in a way, I'm kind of afraid that the Gulf countries will eat our dinner. And then we'll be back to the entire night and the new morning. But of course, the potential is there because even if you look at the population collapse that is expected in the global north, the inverted pyramids everywhere. And you see that over the next 5, 6, 7 decades, Africa will be really in a prime position to reap the benefits. The only issue will be our political leadership.
No, I think now we'll be able to deal with them because things are exposed today that they've been in the past few decades. The social media, we see these things, and people are able to speak power to truth. You have a podcast. If something is wrong, you are able to articulate it here, and if it's a genuine concern, obviously it will resonate with a lot of people. And such a movement can inspire change. And even what the American president is doing, I think he's speeding up the process.
I will agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I think it's speeding the process up.
Yeah.
And whatever changes will come to the international system, whether it be economically, financially, even on the digital revolution side of things, I think it will really bring new changes. And the disruptions will also bring opportunities. So it's just a matter of if we land the opportunities. And tying that to a very common topic that you hear in many Pan-African discussions, reparations, reparative justice. And the AU, for instance, this year, they named this year to be the year of restoration and reparative justice, blah, blah, blah. And on the third episode, I had a Kenyan social justice activist, and we talked a little bit about the reparation issue. Let's say how Germany approached the issue in Namibia. Namibia rejected the amount offered because they said, we will invest it in development cooperation, right? Foreign aid, classical foreign aid. But there's also the other aspect, once again, coming back to the political leadership. Do you think, let's say, if by a miracle, the global north countries that were involved in colonialism, say, okay, Africa, you've talked so much about reparations. We are cutting you a check of, I don't know, $10 trillion, etc. But we still have the same political leadership who are used to like rent seeking, corruption, tenderpreneurship, etc.
Yeah.
Do you think for that reason, will somebody say we are fighting for reparations, but we need to organize ourselves first in terms of the political leadership and the people, etc., before somebody cuts us the check? Because if the check comes with the current leadership of the continent,
Yeah.
I mean, the money could just disappear all over.
Yes. Yes, I think you're right. And for me, the starting point is education.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that is the eventuality, we need to invest in education at a very low level, that you produce the kind of people who would understand that they are responsible for the resurgence of the continent and unpack what that means.
Yeah.
Through the years, so that by the time they come of age, it is ingrained in them. It should be uniform. You see, we are splintered. This Kenyan education system, what there's nothing, there's no common thread for Africa. You see, if we can maybe put that kind of an element as a common thread to say, look, Africa, in 30 years, you need to produce this type of leaders.
Yeah.
We define them, and then for that to happen, maybe the African Union says this percentage of your curriculum must carry this kind of a lesson, and then only then that money then can be released. To people who, and by then hopefully would have refined even the systems to prevent all these ills that have over the years bedeviled African continents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in just winding up the discussion, you've mentioned that, for instance, in your estimation, you believe something like AI is much more of a friend than a foe to the journey Africans are going into.
Yes.
And do you think it's also like something that could help with indigenous knowledge systems that we were talking about earlier? Like not only AI and the digital transformation, but how one could maybe also find a platform to share more information about indigenous knowledge systems.
Yes, it will assist in many ways. That is one way it would assist. But then critically, it will release you as an African man who has to fend for his family.
Yeah.
It will release you from going to work somewhere, but then focus on your project in your house with your children around you. That for me would be a game changer, because then whatever system you use to socialize your children receives little interruption because you are there.
Yeah.
You become a present socializing agent rather than relying on the school and the church to do the work for you. Well, those will still be there, but if we have time on our hands, if you don't rely on a 7 to 5 job, answering to some boss, you are able to run your podcast profitably. You are able to do other things that are on the platform and hence some living. Yeah. It releases you to focus on the real thing, that of building your own family and building the community. That is what I'm hoping for. Remember, not so long ago, my village had 100% joblessness.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
But then 100% wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, people were working in their own terms. The father would go and head cattle, and the mother would go and work in the fields, and so on and so forth. Everybody has got responsibilities. And what we bring at home was enough for us to be defined as being wealthy.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to seek for a job, you know. Yeah, everyone was working in their own terms.
Yeah.
This is why I believe this revolution will eventually usher us in that space where many people, African people, can make money without servicing other interests but their own.
Yeah.
Yeah, that way I see us regaining some of the things that we've lost, including indigenous knowledge systems. Remember, indigenous knowledge system does not equate to old, outdated systems.
Yeah.
It is a system that works for indigenous people, whether in the past, now, or in the future. Yeah, because there's a tendency to equate indigenous knowledge system to archaic stuff.
Archaic pre-colonial style.
Yeah, pre-colonial stuff. No, you are an indigenous man as we speak today.
Yes.
Yeah, you are indigenous to Africa. Well, some will say contemporary, but contemporary and indigenous.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you are where you're supposed to be. You're in your country. That's where I base my optimism. I'm not sure whether you see it far-fetched.
No, not necessarily. I think it's a quite balanced view. And so as you just enter the home stretch of the conversation, Professor Mapaya, I mean, you're from South Africa yourself. You had mentioned earlier that you have disabused yourself of all theories.
Yes.
Do you think ideology is a proper way to try and find, let's say, political solutions to the problems facing Africans? And I'm actually basing this one to you as a South African, someone like Julius Malema.
Yeah.
Because as you had earlier mentioned, Ibrahim Traore, and it appears for him it's much more pragmatism.
Yes.
What is pragmatic, what can work and everything. But if you go on the other side, someone like Julius Malema is always quite popular even in Kenya on social media. You know, Kenyans on Twitter, KOT. And when he says something, like, it goes viral quite easily. But then you are like, it's also very strongly ideologically oriented.
Yes.
Do you think ideology is, let's say, a trap that we can fall into? Because at the end of the day, you are talking about the center left, center right. You are talking about socialist, Marxist.
Marxist, yeah.
And all these actually are also, they also came with the boat.
Yes. I watched
Even though we had our own, let's say, indigenous systems like communalism, which of course contrasts in certain ways and patterns to, let's say, socialism or communism or Marxism.
Yeah. Well, I watched the Kenyan Marxist and I loved it. Yes, precisely. You're correct. I understand why people would want to frame their activism on some ideology.
Yeah.
But then, if you're going to serve the masses of the people, why do you bring an ideology from Germany?
Yeah.
You know, what makes you think Karl Marx had Africa in mind when he postulated? You know, yes. My approach would be, and I'm privileged because as a professor, I'm able to instruct my students to say, critique Karl Marx, go to your village and use the information that you get there to critique it and see if you can find a replacement. Yeah. So that is the challenge that I normally pose on people who still have some work to do, like yourself.
Yeah.
To say, right, it's enough to have sung praises of these people who have done this for their own country, their own well-being. What are you saying? What are you putting on the table then for us, your people? If there is a system, let it come up and then let's refine it until it can match all those. And then see if it can. You see, you can see the mess democracy is causing on the African continent because it was not born of the continent.
It's been supplanted.
Yeah. it's causing havoc. And if we understand, if we're educated, we could use the same principles to see if we cannot craft something that is organic to the continent, and it will have, support all across. Can you imagine if the entire African continent, and it's easy, you see the concept of Ubuntu, people just bought into it because it permeates the African continent. So why can't we then go deeper?
Yeah.
And then try and find things that we could then term ideologies, African ideologies. I just published a paper now, and then it was met with criticism. So I was arguing that African languages are philosophical dispositions because they represent a worldview and a way to think and a way to articulate ideas. So there's an argument that I'm putting across, but obviously it's going to be, if it were to be reviewed by someone like you, you would understand what my argument. Yeah, then that way you can critique it and say, but it's weak here, it's strong there. Look at this area and strengthen it. So, in a nutshell, my brother, I'm saying African scholars, we've got a lot of work to do, and then we cannot afford to be cheerleaders of other scholars from somewhere. Yeah, we cannot afford to be cheerleaders of other scholars who have their bread buttered in both sides. Yeah, we need to really get down to the ground and see if we would succeed in putting African epistemologies at the center of our discourse.
Right.
I think that's what I am about, really.
I think that's a very nice parting shot. The way you've summarized it.
Yeah.
And we have about 4 minutes just to complete. So I was just thinking, maybe you can touch a little bit about your music career, because you're also a fully fledged musician, right?
Yes. Really, what do we do? What do we say? Remember I said if we don't say it, all of us, the prayer won't reach where it's supposed to reach. Come on, let me hear you say it. Yeah. Oh, have mercy. You want me to play the guitar? Oh, have mercy. You want me to play the guitar? Oh, Lord, have mercy. Yeah, it's interesting,
How, for instance, does it feed into your academic career as a professor, and maybe even your own worldview, actually, about indigenous knowledge systems and stuff like that?
Well, musicians are born. That's an African justification. Yeah. So you've got the responsibility of being true to the music and to the deity that may be bequeathed with the talent.
Yeah.
That's where you come from. But then I went to school, and because in South Africa you can't study music at high school level, I've had to go to an organization, a non-governmental organization. Then I did classical music, but then it felt like artificial horns. It was not sticking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not sticking. So I went to the University of Cape Town and studied jazz. Jazz, because it's a black art, it was tolerable. It made sense to me, and then it reconnected. Then I did my BMAS Bachelor of Musicology in Jazz Performance at the University of Cape Town. A concrete university, very little African soul. Then I did my master's at VES, similar environment, very hostile to African soul, spirit.
Yeah.
Then lucky enough for me, I got employed at the university, at Uber first, the organization, NGO organization. And then there I was privileged to teach so many musicians and instill in them the way I see their role as musicians on the continent. Luckily, I got employed at the University of Venda, where I also did my PhD, but I chose not to do it in African music, rather in African studies, because I wanted to have a broader view of the African world. So now when I teach, I still teach music, even though it's at PhD and master's level. But we're dealing with the kind of issues you're probing. I'm aware that I have to be relevant because at some point, music was my only career. I made money out of it. But even then, I'll take jazz and really literally fuse it with the traditional elements so that if I play it to someone in the village, they can recognize something of their own in the music, even though they may not appreciate it because it would be in jazz or funk or pop. But at least when the song plays, they must be able to say, oh, hang on, I know that thing that he's doing there. So that is how I've been approaching it. Yes.
All right, Professor Geoff Mapaya. I think we've had a really interesting conversation today in the evening. Yeah, I think we've fleshed out a lot of topics that we had set out to actually do. And I really hope that for anybody who will be watching this particular podcast episode, that you will take something out of it. And especially if you are an African scholar, like there was a direct address to African scholars on something that people can do in terms of publishing and many other areas. So, So, Professor, final words before we close the show?
Thank you so much for putting up this fantastic platform. And then I can only wish you luck and prosperity. And then please spread your wings, cover the entire continent, because we really need to have a conversation as Africans. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I know we'll stay in contact.
Yes, definitely.
And to you watching the episode, kindly don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and the notification button for future episodes covering geopolitics, geoeconomics, and development issues on the African continent. This has been the Nubianomedy podcast. I'm your host, Pius Ogola from Kenya. And we had a guest from South Africa, so we are actually trying to spread our wings as has been advised. Thank you very much and have a good evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye.